Okay. Hi, Jacob. Thank you for speaking with me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Mhm. Right. If I just start about saying who parent support are, what we do, and things, and then I'll pass on to you to do the same for special effect. So, parent support is a one-stop shop for parents of children and young adults with special educational needs and disabilities. And our goal with things like this is to help our ever-growing online community of over 2.2 thousand parents navigate the world of disability by bringing to their attention helpful resources and sources of support that may be relevant to them, such as yourselves at Special Effect. So, if you'd like to explain who Special Effect are.
Yeah, so my name's Jacob, and I'm one of the occupational therapists working at Special Effect. And our goal at Special Effect is to help individuals covering all ages to essentially get access to video games. And we do this through specific equipment. We can do it with certain software. If anyone has a physical disability, we do our best to help them either get into gaming or get back into gaming through equipment means. And we would be doing face-to-face assessments before COVID,
Yeah.
but that's kind of forced us to go into as the whole world has adapted to video calls like this. And so now we're doing video calls, and we kind of assess the person over a Zoom call, and we kind of gauge what equipment can work for them. And then we post out the equipment, and then we help them set it up on their end and just see how they get on with it. And it's a lifelong service we offer. There's no kind of limit to the amount of calls or assessments that can be done by us. It's because people will may have progressive conditions or new games or consoles want to come out, and we'll do our best to sort of stick with you and help you throughout your gaming career as it is.
Oh, that sounds great. So, who benefits from your services usually? Is it mostly children, or do you help adults as well? Or is there a certain type of disability that you find you get the most response from?
Yeah, there's we see, I think it's quite balanced with
Okay.
in terms of children and adults.
Um,
There are sort of I guess times like school holidays where we do get
yes,
inquiries
yeah.
from it's probably more children based there,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
the parents just looking for something for their child to do during the holidays or over lockdown, and gaming is one of the great outlets for that. But as a kind of general
Hmm.
percentage, I'd say it's fairly balanced with the amount of people we see. We see people from we've seen as young as 2 years old up to the age
Oh,
of
wow.
80 odd. So
Oh,
it
wow.
doesn't really
Okay.
matter. And these are people who,
Mhm.
for the older generation, it could be people who have never considered gaming but never thought how they can get into it. And for
Yeah.
younger children, it's at the very start of their the gaming career, and it's just something wonderful to be introduced to because it's so inclusive. As for physical conditions, that's quite a variety as well because it is any physical condition. So like whether that's cerebral palsy, whether it's
Mhm.
Duchenne's muscular dystrophy or
Mhm.
stroke, brain injury, yeah, we cover pretty much everything. And so yeah, we would just kind of recommend if anyone does have issues with video games based on a physical condition, just yeah, we'll do our best to
Mhm.
help you out.
Okay, I think you've kind of answered this question actually, but just is there a set criteria that has to be met in order for somebody to need your services per se? Or is it just if there's some sort of limitation to them being able to um access a game in any way, then you can help them?
Mm. Yeah, it's essentially it is just anyone with a physical disability
Okay.
is kind of
Hmm.
that's the core criteria. Um,
Yeah.
we don't tend to deal with like auditory stuff or visual
Okay.
difficulties because that's a whole different ballpark for us. So we don't want to sort of say we're experts in all things game because We're
Yes.
not in all areas, and so it is down to completely, if there's a physical barrier preventing you from accessing like a standard game controller, then it will be there.
And as you said about the visual side, I suppose a lot of the adaptations that you help with can feature like eye tracking software as well, doesn't it? So I suppose a visual impairment would sort of perhaps clash a little bit with that sometimes. So I suppose, if you start introducing more disabilities and more, impairments, then you then have to expand on all the technological advancements and stuff, and that's obviously not
Exactly.
that area that you deal with directly. So I understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah.
So obviously this is, I would presume, been affected in some way by the pandemic and things not being open, so to speak. But could you tell us a little bit about your games room and what that involves, where it is and things when it is open and running as usual?
Yeah. So back, if you can cast your mind back to before 2020, we would often do assessments. We would either invite people down to our games room where they can come down to our base down in Oxfordshire, and we would provide essentially a whole afternoon of assessing an individual to see how we can better get them gaming. And how we tend to do that is we ask them some questions, what they find difficult, what they can do okay, and we have a lot of equipment that we sort of trial and error to see what works for them, what doesn't. And we also offer a long-term loaning process for certain equipment as well. So there's no obligation to sort of purchase your own equipment. We offer the equipment to be borrowed as long as the person is still using it. And so that's one way of how we used to do assessments. Hopefully we'll be doing it sometime soon, hopefully by the end of this year maybe. And other ways it would be we would go and visit people in their own homes. So we would be we'd be traveling all over the UK. So we cover as far down south as Cornwall, but all the way up in Scotland, and we do Ireland as well. So the whole of the UK, we would be completely on the road all the time. And so we're very fond of all the motorways of the UK, although I haven't seen it for a long time now.
That's true. I think that you're the only one there. So is anything that you can loan, do you have like a version of everything available to you? Is that all in your games room? So there's nothing that you could potentially loan but that isn't stocked in the games room, so everybody can try everything
Yeah,
that you have on offer?
typically yes. We try and have a good stock of all the equipment just so that everyone has a chance to try some things out. So yeah, we do tend to keep a decent stock of everything, because then there's different sizes of certain equipment that you may have, like different size switches and different size joysticks or different style or shape game pads, and it's always good to have variety to just sort of do a trial and error sort of thing. And so obviously you've got a question saying, do you work with or get referrals from physios, OTs, etc.? We do. That's quite a common thing for the healthcare professional to sort of get in touch with us. What we do try and ask is for, say, if it's for a healthcare professional referring a child, we like to try and see if we can get the parents involved, just to keep the line of communication as straightforward as possible. But that doesn't mean you can't sort of make a referral. You're welcome to do that. It's just it's always good to just take a look at our FAQs on our website. And it says, how do people find out about your services? It tends to be through word of mouth. It's because we are quite a small charity. Word gets out to communities like Parent Portal and other kind of Facebook groups like this, and the word kind of spreads like that. We also had a lot of coverage at conventions. So places like a Comic-Con, or there's other ones called Insomnia or EGX Res, and we would often have a stand there, and people can always just come up and ask us questions, or we can let them know what we're all about. So that used to be, again, another way of doing it. But yeah, word does get around, and that tends to be we always tend to ask people how they've heard of us, just because we're curious ourselves when it comes to filling in an inquiry or a referral to us.
So, with regards to the needs assessment being quite trial and error with what adaptation would work for somebody, obviously that sounds as though it's quite, freestyle on like an independent basis, like depending on the child or the person that, is there. But do you have a sort of general outline of a structure that you tend to follow when these assessments take place? So somebody turns up and then you start by doing this and then follow a sort of basic process, or is it all just literally like whatever happens on the day?
Yeah, we tend to ask, we try to get as much information as possible before we see the person, just so that we know exactly
What to expect.
exactly, yeah. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest questions is what a person's functional movement is like. So we like to ask about head and neck movement, because we position a joystick or a switch by someone's chin or by someone's head. Whether they're able to walk, if they're in a wheelchair. So all these questions will determine what equipment we would often loan out to them. And whilst we don't like to assume that because one person has this the same condition as another person, that doesn't mean they're going to get the exact same equipment setup. All of our assessments are completely tailored based on the individual's gaming needs, as in what functional movement they can achieve, but also what they want to play as well, because there's games that have a small amount of buttons and joysticks required to play, whereas there are other ones that are a lot more complex that require, for example, an entire controller worth of buttons and joysticks to play. And what we like to do is progress up to games that require more buttons and more joysticks to play. So we start off someone with, for example, playing FIFA. You can play from FIFA 18 onwards. You can play it by using just a single joystick and 2 buttons, and it's called a 2-button mode, aptly named. And so once you're in a football match game, you can play with a single joystick, and you can press, like if you're on PlayStation, you play X to pass, and then circle button to shoot, and the player will know what action to take, whether they're defending or attacking, based on where they are on the field. So that's kind of one of our most popular games, is a lot of FIFA things. So,
wow.
And then we can kind of work our way up towards more complicated games. For instance, something like Red Dead Redemption 2, which I guess is not a child-friendly game, but it's just an example that requires both the joysticks and almost every button on the controller. And it's still, I want people to know that they are still able to play games and to not let their physical condition be a sort of barrier, because there are ways around that. So I think it's always worth getting in touch with us to see if we can help out. Another question here. My son is 7 years old and he has a slower processing speed due to his disability. He tends not to enjoy gaming. What do you suggest to encourage him to play more? That's interesting. It's difficult because I guess there might be other games that might entice them to play. I'm not sure what games that your son would be wanting to play himself. But it's always good to try and look up for variety, and that's one thing that we can offer as well. We try, as part of like our research perspective, we like to look up, and we have to look up a lot of these games to understand the control schemes for them, how many buttons, how many joysticks are needed, and how easy it is. But also the settings within the game that can make it a little bit easier to help people play. For instance, someone who may struggle to repeatedly tap a button, there are a lot more games now that have a setting where you can turn that off from a repeated tap into holding it down instead. So an example like that is Spider-Man games now included that, and that's one of the things we do. We like to make we like to always look for settings like that, because it makes a world of difference to someone. I even struggle with repeatedly tapping buttons. It's not really a very natural thing for someone to just do that repeatedly, and to change to a hold is an absolute game changer, because you know, a lot of these games require you to do this to progress further, and if you can't do that, then it just stops you dead in your tracks.
Yes.
And then another question: are there any games you found that are too challenging to support? I don't think so. I think I don't want to brag, but we have the charity's been going since 2007. I hope I got that right, and we've covered a lot of games throughout the years, and it's really kind of dependent on the individual and their functional needs and whether they can play the game. So we always try and look for ways to get around certain things like that. For instance, if someone can't access all the buttons on a controller, another method we can do is bring in voice controls. So you say a command, and then the game will then do that action, as long as so we can program voice scripts for games on PC and the console. Another way of doing it is on the Xbox, there's a really cool feature called the Copilot. And what that does is you can connect two controllers together to act as player one. So you can essentially share the controls between each other on a single game. And that has proved really crucial for our work to allow different controllers to be connected at the same time, because one of the big things we use is I don't know if you've heard about this, but there's one called the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And what that is, it's an official Xbox controller that you can plug in external switches and joysticks into it and essentially create your own custom setup. I've actually got the box with me. The actual controller I have is downstairs, but this is essentially what it looks like.
Yeah.
So you see black buttons act as the A and the B, and then on the top here is where you would see switch ports. And that's where you can plug in external switches to be whatever button you need for the game. And that, coupled with, say, a standard Xbox controller, you can position switches by someone's foot. So if someone, say, has had a stroke, can't access this side of the controller, we could plug in a switch to act as one of these buttons, and then they can continue using sort of this side of the controller and use their foot to access it instead. So that's one of the ways that we can get the Xbox adaptive controller working on a console as well, because we've got special adapters that basically trick the console into thinking that it's like a PlayStation console or Nintendo Switch console. So you can, if you sort of have more than one console and you want to chop and change between each one, you can keep the setup that we've made across all consoles, so you don't have to have a separate setup for each console.
That is really interesting. A lot of positive response to all of that. People are liking all the technology there. What would you say if some of the limitations were more complex, or there was multiple limitations? So, for example, if there was limited hand function, but then also issues with speech, so the voice recognition wasn't so much of an option, how would you deal if there was, more than one limitation to approach?
Well, it comes back to I guess the co-op feature is really imperative in that, because even if, say, we can get someone using a single switch, say by their hand or by their foot. There is still, you can still play games. I just think it's always worth just getting in touch to see what we can do on an individual basis, because I would say that we'd always be able to do something for someone. We haven't. There's not been. I don't think there's been a chance where we've said no, we can't do that. So it's always worth just getting in touch.
So you mentioned briefly before about like the different types of joystick, like the chin joystick, and can you just go over some of your maybe most popular or main adaptations that you tend to use most commonly for things?
There's we go to different size joysticks. One of the ones that we tend to see, particularly for people like cerebral palsy who may have, say, uncontrolled movements, is we find that the bigger is better for that condition. But I don't want to generalize again, because again, everyone is unique and every condition is unique. So what it is, if you can imagine those old school style arcade joysticks, it's basically like that. And it's like a chunky joystick, and there's a range of toppers that you can come with. So you can say you can have a ball-shaped topper, or you can have what's called a T-topper. So it's a bit like that shape for people to sort of rest their hand on. If people say have a wheelchair joystick, we try and mimic something similar to what they're used to. The same goes for, say, if someone's using accessibility switches, we like to mimic what they're already used to, just because we know that they're comfortable with that kind of thing. So that's kind of the biggest joystick we like to use. And there are also lots of smaller ones, say for people who have like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, someone who has very limited finger movement and very not as strong physical movements either. Another thing we tend to do is we have controllers that I call low force. So we've got a really cool technician who physically lightens joysticks and gamepads. So that essentially means that it removes the springs and the rumbles from a controller like this, and they are made physically lighter to move and to press the buttons individually. And the same goes for certain joysticks as well. Particularly for chin joysticks, we like to use the quite small ones, so that it's just easier to access your chin. But for people who, like, say, have Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, having a smaller one also means more room to play around with positioning of the switches, because they already have limited physical movement anyway. And so trying to put on a lot of, say, a controller buttons and joysticks into a small setting using smaller joysticks is really crucial for that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of joysticks we work with. I'm sorry I haven't got any to showcase. I should have thought about it earlier. But if I was at the office, I'd be going back and forth and showing everything we have. But unfortunately, just missed out there.
That's good. So if there's things that obviously wouldn't suit a specific case, like if somebody required a more custom adaptation that you'd not ever encountered before, how would you go about helping them to acquire something or create something that would suit their needs? How?
Yeah, it's we used to do a lot of taking apart our own controllers within the office, but now we try and go for the more stuff you can buy off the shelves. As for custom made equipment, this comes back to our technician, who's very savvy and has been dealing with accessibility in gaming for years. Say, for instance, if someone would like to have lighter buttons, but keep the joysticks the same, then that's possible. We can custom make the lightness and keep the joysticks as standard. It can make everything else lighter, and this is so important because everyone's different. It's always good to just know what their needs are. And for something like like that, it's always good to ask the right questions, and that's why it's always good that we have our follow-up calls, because then we can keep on tweaking as much as we need to, just because things might just progress quickly or it might break, so we can also replace things as well. So we do some of the stuff is custom made, but I wouldn't say it's as much now, because we find that more often than not, we find that equipment that you can buy off the shelves is much more reliable these days. Ever since the Xbox adaptive controller came out in September 2018, before then, that's when you did have all these what we call a switch interface. So something you can plug switches and joysticks into. There were smaller companies that were making these switch interfaces, and they were quite expensive as well and hard to make, and there was limited stock, and it would take a while to get everything sorted. Whereas with the Xbox adaptive controller, it's reliable, it's an official product, and it's cost effective. It's about £75 for a single controller, and if you think about that compared to a standard Xbox controller, which I think is about £50, the difference isn't really that much. So someone here saying, can you move the position of the buttons? So while there are some controllers that you can kind of custom make your own layout, where you can sort of remove a joystick here and put it with the D-pad. However, a more reliable method we find is all of the major gaming consoles, so PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, they all have the ability to what we call remap the buttons. So you can chop and change, you can swap buttons around on a system level. So for example, if you struggle to press the button here, which is the left trigger, you could change the function over to, say, the A button. And you can do that in any console. And the same goes for joystick positioning as well. So if you prefer to move the main character by using your right hand, you can swap the joystick functions over so that you're able to do that. And that's very useful for somebody who, for example, has had a stroke and they can only use the right side of their body, because by default, the left stick is what's used to navigate through menus and move the character. Having the option to swap sticks is just so much easier to help people with, say, left-sided weakness, or for people just for a personal preference. But it's always good to look at the games as well, because a lot of these games will also have their own remapping settings as well that you can do. They might be either in the form of their own kind of preset controller schemes. So there might already be a controller layout where the sticks already swapped. For instance, like Call of Duty, you can swap them. There's a mode called there's a controller mode called Southpaw, where the sticks are swapped over and the functions of the bumpers and triggers are swapped over. Or a lot of games you can just remap everything in the game. And for people who require certain layouts for each individual game, that is crucial, because whilst it's always good to remap within the game's console, some people might find it's not enough and just want to be able to remap individual games, just to make it a lot easier for them having to go back to the PlayStation settings and change everything the way they want to for that particular game. And so, yeah, we're always keen to see remapping in games.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's good that obviously you can tailor it for the individual basis in terms of games and stuff. Because as you say, it's all well and good having a controller that you can use, but then if it only applies to a limited number of games, then you're facing another restriction, then aren't you? So the fact that there's that flexibility there is another bonus. So
Yeah.
that is really good to hear as well. You've also, SpecialEffect has done a lot of development of their own games as well, haven't they? Like their web-based games. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the games that you offer yourselves?
Yeah, so we've recently released a website called iGaze Games. So it's a bunch of online games so you can access using a eye gaze system, or even like a single button or two buttons, because we find that eye gaze users, there isn't an awful lot of games that support an eye gaze system, and we like to find that we always find that with the eye gaze system, it's more of a additional controller, if you will, to certain other games. Like in Dirt, you can, or Dirt, which is a driving game, there is a eye gaze mode where you can sort of look left and the car will steer left, and you look up and it'll accelerate, and look down and it'll brake. But for some of the games, eye gaze is more of an accompaniment, because it essentially acts as a mouse cursor. So you probably would still need a keyboard to play a lot of other games. So that's why SpecialEffect created this website called Eye Gaze Games, and it's well worth checking out. And it's also, we're trying to launch the multiplayer aspect of it as well, so you can play with people all over the world. There's games like there's Solitaire, there's a unique one called Mole Miners, which if you like Peggle, it's very similar to that. There's Chesckers, there's chess. There's also a space driving game where you're essentially you're a spaceship and you're navigating tracks. There's an awful lot to check out there. And one of the biggest, I guess, people know Minecraft, but it's a very complex game to play. So what the SpecialEffect team ended up doing was creating this brilliant interface that can be used entirely with an eye gaze system. So we've got a wonderful coder who created this a system where it's got all the different modes and everything you need to play Minecraft with your eyes, and that's called EyeMine, and that's worth just checking out, because we've released an update as well, which gives the player even more controls to play in there, hopefully as seamlessly as possible. So yeah, if you want to play Minecraft with your eyes, well, now you can by just checking out EyeMine.
Amazing, so much creativity there that I wouldn't have even, thought of. Just things that you covered all bases by the sounds of it. But I'm sure even though you've covered a lot, that you've still got things, in development as new games come out or new ideas form. So what would you say your plans for the future are, hopefully as well post-pandemic, when there's hopefully more options available to everybody as well?
Yeah, well, we're always on the lookout for new pieces of kit that come out that can help people. So that's a big thing. We've got a really good research and development team who are always feeding back new bits of software or new bits of kit that we can look at. We can hopefully think to expand eye gaze games and have more players on that, have more games on that. And it'll just be really nice to actually go back to doing face-to-face visits once again, and people can come down to our base down in Oxford, or we can go and see them in person. I think that's sort of the biggest thing at the minute, but that's the reason why we're being quite cautious, is that because we travel all over the UK, we want to make sure that everyone is safe. But the way that we're doing work at the minute with these video calls is very effective, because we are able to see people very quickly as well. So yeah, they are able to. We are still able. We still open the business essentially. So yeah.
Absolutely. Just going back for a second with the web-based things, do you have to create an account to, if you did do it like multiplayer with people in different parts of the world, would you have to then like sign up to anything and then have like an avatar or whatever to then communicate with others, or is it just you just go on the website and it's there ready to go kind of thing?
Yeah, as soon as you log in, it'll say, "Are you new?" And then you click yes, and it'll provide a username for you and a secret word, which essentially is your password to get into your account. And if you are, if you've been in before, it'll say, "Are you new?" You click no, and it'll ask you for your secret word, and you type it in, and bam, you're straight in your account. It's that straightforward. You just get given a username, and you're ready to start playing.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. I might have to go on myself for this.
Oh, definitely. I absolutely
Yeah.
recommend checking it out.
So, how can people support you then in terms of fundraising, getting the word out, or is there any like events that they can attend that would really help you as obviously a charity? So, all the help you can get, the better.
Yeah, because we are 100% reliant on donations and always have been. So
hmm
people can fundraise for us, any day of the year, by any means necessary. We have a lot of streamers on platforms like Twitch who do a lot
Yeah.
of fundraising streams for us.
Mm.
We've also got a lot of these events like Game Blast, which is where we ask people to do anything gaming related and to fundraise for us. It's worth checking on our website, specialeffect.org.uk,
Mhm.
to just have a look at the virtual events that are happening in a minute. Hopefully, we are quite looking forward to hopefully getting back into in-person things. But it's worth just checking out the events page and just see what's upcoming, just see what takes your fancy. We do a lot of virtual runs. For instance, we've done like the Oxford 10K and the London Marathon. So things like that. I would just always say your first port of call is look at the website and just seeing if anything there takes your fancy. If you want to raise some money for us, and that would be brilliant. We'd love that. We'd be forever in your debt because we're always thanking our supporters and fundraisers, because without them there is no special effect.
Yeah. We have covered a lot, I feel, but if there's anything, questions that we've not answered after this, where's the best place for people to go if they want to find out further information? Is it your website or is there somewhere else like a contact that they should reach out to with a question or
Yeah, so if you just head over to our website, which is specialeffect.org.uk, there's a bunch of FAQs there that you might want to briefly read through.
Mhm.
There's also a contact us page which asks you to fill in the form and just say why you're getting in touch, if we can help you with anything, or if you've got any questions about gaming. We'll always have the inquiries passed on to either myself or one of the other occupational therapists on the team. Another resource page is if you're interested in game control schemes and game settings and all kinds of cool kit and stuff, then if you check out a website called gameaccess.org, that is that's got a whole host of videos that we've created that showcases games that we think are very useful for some players, outline the controls of certain games and what settings could be useful. And it's also worth checking out our YouTube channel, which is also called Special Effect, because that also has a lot of videos on there that some people might find useful. So Game Access, all one word, YouTube, Special Effect, and the Special Effect website.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. So, thank you for such an informative and interesting conversation and for working your way through all the questions
That's all right.
from our audience today. Just reiterate that this video, once we're not live anymore, will be available anytime on the Parent Support Facebook page, and we'll also be uploading it to our YouTube channel as well. So we can share the link on, and you can find it anytime if you want to watch it back and if you've forgotten any of the information that we covered, because we covered a lot. So thank you, Jacob, for speaking with me tonight, and it's been really interesting.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.